medical teams are just waiting in readiness in order to receive any call or to receive any information about the location of the Israeli bombardment. So some people are bringing victims by using their own simple methods of transportation. One of the Palestinians have approached one of the injured people throughout his car, pulled by a donkey, to the Nasser hospital. This is a clear sign that the ambulances are really facing a great pressure in terms of identifying the location of targetings, and even it explains how much severe is the fuel crisis in Gaza.
Israel's chief military spokesman says its army has surrounded Gaza City and will continue its bombing campaign.
Great pain, and we are determined to win, to have victory, and to bring back our beloved ones. Our forces through Golan were able to surround Gaza and arrived by sea also. And today we have northern Gaza and southern Gaza. They arrived by sea and were able to control these areas. We're trying to provide a corridor, a safe corridor, so that people can leave and move safely. But we will continue our airstrikes in an intensive way, and we will continue to attack and bomb northern Gaza.
Let's now speak to Hamda Salhout. She's joining us from occupied East Jerusalem. So since the war began, almost daily rockets have been fired by Al-Qassam brigades from Gaza towards Tel Aviv. And tonight was no different. Tell us about the latest barrage of rockets and what impact they're having.
Well, look, we have been seeing near daily rocket barrages from the Gaza Strip hitting more central and more northern areas like Tel Aviv and the surrounding suburbs. Earlier tonight, rocket sirens sounding in dozens of Israeli towns. We're talking about Tel Aviv, Rishon LeZion, Holon, Bet Yam, South Jaffa. The Israeli military's Iron Dome missile defense system intercepting most of those rockets. However, there was a malfunction among one of the Iron Dome interceptors. It did not reach its target, and it ended up falling into the street and causing a large fire. At the moment, the Israeli authorities are saying that there are no casualties, no injuries, and no reports of damage. Hamas's Al-Qassam brigades claiming responsibility for that rocket barrage, saying that they sent it because of the continuing Israeli massacres that are going on inside of the Gaza Strip, Darine.
And while all of this is happening, we understand that the CIA director, Bill Burns, has arrived in Tel Aviv on his first visit since the war began. What's on his agenda there?
This is the CIA's director's first trip to Israel since the war began, but he's making several stops in the region. But the main focal point that he will be addressing is to meet with defense officials, the Israeli prime minister, the Mossad chief, to see what they can do about the Israeli captives. Now, there's a lot else that's on his agenda. He's also going to go to Qatar, to Jordan, to the United Arab Emirates, and to Egypt to discuss mutual issues. Among them is the issue of captives, but the main thing that the regional allies are expressing is the unfolding humanitarian catastrophe inside of the Gaza Strip. Additionally, the United States is going to reiterate that it does not want any non-regional actors to enter the war and broaden the front into multiple places in the region. Now, this is all part of the Biden administration's plan to really reiterate its support for Israel, to show that it has its officials coming here on a regular basis. However, there is another school of thought among the Americans. They are trying to get the Israelis to take a different approach, to see if they can have perhaps a more targeted way of combating Hamas that doesn't result in so many civilian casualties. We are nearing, on this day 30 of the war, 10,000 civilian casualties inside of the Gaza Strip. And this is something that's going to be on the CIA director's agenda among a laundry list of issues to discuss with Israeli officials. Darine.
All right, thank you so much for that reporting from occupied East Jerusalem. Now, Israeli forces are carrying out more raids in the occupied West Bank. So since the war in Gaza began on October the 7th, they've stepped up their operations in the territory. Let's bring in Zain Basravi. He'll join us from Ramallah with an update on how extensive this raid has been.
It is really difficult to know where to start. Every night, these raids seem to become more numerous, more intense. It just becomes a patchwork of violence. And let me walk you through what we're hearing today. There are ongoing Israeli military raids in Hebron, clashes in Bethlehem, in Kalkilia. In Jenin, tear gas has been fired at residential homes, and there's also raids being carried out in 2 villages in Jenin. Violent clashes in Hebron, with Israeli military also removing CCTV footage, presumably investigating activity and movements in those areas. We're also hearing about a raid at the Balata refugee camp in Nablus, and just before we came on air, we heard reports that in Tubas, we're also seeing raids and heavy armed clashes. There were reports that an explosive device was used against the Israeli military there. And consistently, what we're also seeing as these raids go on and on every night is more pushback. We're seeing more indications of resistance from Palestinian residents, more armed resistance from Palestinian fighters there. And now we're hearing of this explosive device being used in at least one raid that is ongoing in Tubas against the Israeli military. Now, as these things carry on, they tend to get more intense, they ebb and flow, but one of the largest raids we're hearing reports of now is happening at the Shafat camp in occupied East Jerusalem. 300 strong Israeli force is raiding the Shafat refugee camp, and it is one of the biggest incidents of this kind that we've seen. The important thing to remember about Shafat is it is similar to Jenin, and then there is a strong presence of armed Palestinian fighters in that camp, which would indicate a reason for why the Israelis have gone in with such a strong force. And in the town of Anata, not far from Shafat camp, there was also a raid there in which they arrested Maruf al-Rifai, the advisor to the Palestinian Authority governor of Jerusalem. So it's been a very active night so far.
Yeah, and Zain, speaking of the Palestinian Authority, the Secretary of State, Antony Blinken, was in Ramallah, where you were earlier today. We know that he met with the Palestinian Authority President, Mahmoud Abbas. People weren't happy that he was there, though, were they? Tell us what the scene was like.
That is correct. We saw what many people here describe as one of the world's most powerful leaders meeting with and shaking hands with one of the most compromised, perhaps one of the most weak leaders in the world. And those optics definitely caused some anger. We saw a number of protesters come out into the streets, not just in Ramallah, but in a number of cities across the occupied West Bank. The significance there is that in the last few weeks, we've seen protests dwindle. Now, it should be remembered that since the incidents of October 7th, 152 people have been killed in raids in the occupied West Bank. 2,080 people have been detained. 80% of them are expected to be held for 6 months without any charge. And what that has done is deplete the leadership of activists, of the street movements here. So we hadn't seen a great deal of protests for some time, but in the last 24 hours, with Blinken's visit, we saw a number of people come out into the streets in bigger numbers than we've seen for the past several days. We saw that not just in Ramallah, but in cities across the occupied West Bank, with people chanting that if you are not protesting with us, you are doing nothing. It was to protest Blinken's visit, as well as the ongoing and uptick in bombardment of Gaza that we saw today.
All right, Zain, thank you so much for that update from Ramallah. So, as Zain was mentioning, more than 150 Palestinians have been killed in Israeli raids since the war started a month ago, and more than 2,100 have been injured. Bernard Smith reports.
A routine night in the occupied West Bank. This time the target is a 20-year-old man suspected of being a fighter in a Palestinian armed group. His body was taken away by this bulldozer. Nabil Habiyeh was the 149th Palestinian killed in the West Bank since October the 7th. A few hours later, the funeral of another young man. A routine day. This is the rhythm of life here. Raid, funeral, repeat.
They're taking out their anger for October 7 on us, the defenseless people here. They want us to hate the resistance fighter. But you know what? That's not going to happen.
This is not the first time they've caused this destruction. If they think they can force us out or weaken us, they're mistaken. Every time they do this, it makes us more determined to stay.
Into this increasingly oppressive environment came Antony Blinken. The US Secretary of State told Mahmoud Abbas that his administration should play a central role in what to a president with little legitimacy in the eyes of most Palestinians. 80% of them want him to resign, according to the latest poll.
PA is unstable. It's seen as a collaborationist regime. And so President Mahmoud Abbas would want to discuss with Blinken how to stabilize the situation for himself here, because as many know, he is running this part of Palestine in an authoritarian form of rule.
Blinken thanked Abbas for helping to maintain calm in the West Bank. But what calm there is fragile. Settler attacks have more than doubled since October the 7th. Violence, already at a 15-year high, has surged.
The Palestinian president told Blinken that his administration would consider taking over Gaza only as part of a deal for the creation of a Palestinian state. But for anyone in Gaza at the moment, this sort of talk may seem irrelevant, while the US refuses to back Abbas's call for a ceasefire, and Israel won't even consider the slightest pause in its bombing campaign. Bernard Smith, Al Jazeera, Ramallah.
Well, the US Secretary of State is now in Turkey as part of his diplomatic tour of the region. His visit comes as relations between Israel and Turkey are strained. Both countries have recalled their envoys. The Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan has condemned Israel's attacks on civilians in Gaza. He's offered to help mediate the conflict. Before heading to Turkey, he made a stop in Baghdad for talks with the Iraqi Prime Minister, and he said that Washington wants to contain the conflict.
We're working very hard to make sure that the conflict in Gaza does not escalate, does not spread to other places, whether it's here, whether it's elsewhere in the region. This is the very vital and urgent work of American diplomacy, and that's what we've been engaged in as well throughout this trip.
Jordan says that its military has airdropped urgent medical aid into Gaza. In a post on X, Jordan's King Abdullah said the operation was conducted early on Monday. He says the emergency supplies were meant for the Jordanian field hospital to help the injured in the war on Gaza. Well, Israel's relentless bombing campaign has left people in Gaza facing a dire humanitarian situation with food, water, and medical supplies running out. The UN World Food Programme is warning people are facing extreme food shortages. Bakeries have shut down due to the bombing and a lack of fuel. Shops are struggling to restock. The Palestinian Red Crescent says about 420 trucks carrying aid have crossed into Gaza since October 21st. Before the 7th of October, Gaza used to receive up to 850 aid trucks daily. Here's what's coming up after the break. Calling for a ceasefire, thousands protest in Mexico's capital, demanding the government take a tough stance on Israel's war on Gaza.